Welcome to Lawyers Without Billboards, where we break down family law and other areas of the law. No gimmicks, no legal jargon, just real, unfiltered talk from real lawyers. Join your hosts, Steve, Patty, Jimmy, and Alexa, partners at Shewmaker Lewis, a law firm based in Atlanta, Georgia. Every episode, they tackle the legal questions that matter most: divorce, custody, child support, alimony, and everything in between. They'll pull back the curtain to give you real insights on what happens inside the courtroom and beyond.
All right, y'all, welcome back to Lawyers Without Billboards. I'm Patty Shewmaker. I got my husband and law partner, Steve, and our law partners, Jimmy and Alexa, joining us this morning.
Here we are.
We appreciate you guys tuning in for another episode, or perhaps this is the first episode you're listening to, and if so, we're glad you joined us.
Welcome.
Welcome. We would love to hear any feedback, comments, and ideas for things that you would like to hear about. Is there question that you have that you would like us to answer or talk about in one of these podcasts? We would love to hear from you. You can email us through our website, or you can also comment on any of our YouTube videos. Jimmy, what are we talking about today?
Today we're going to talk about mediation. Mediation, what is it? Do you have to do it? All that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah, mediation. It's like on, what movie is it with
Wedding
Sandra?
Crashers.
No, I'm thinking about the one with Sandra Bullock and Hugh Grant, where Hugh Grant is mediating his divorce, and they're 5 minutes into it, and they're all sitting around a conference room table, and then the parties start arguing, and somebody throws water, and it's over.
I got nothing.
Okay, the better way to
Probably
talk
go to
about it
Wedding
is the
Crashers.
beginning of Wedding Crashers, when they're talking about frequent flyer models and flying to Denver to meet his
whore.
Okay, I wasn't going to say that.
Steve.
We will do a later podcast on divorce legal movies.
Yay.
Yes.
And regarding mediation, I do need to know the movie you're talking about, because I
Right.
need to watch it before we do that
2 weeks notice.
That topic.
That's what it is.
Okay,
It's called 2 weeks, because I've seen 2 weeks notice, and I don't think it's a divorce case.
It's not a
an
divorce case.
It's an employment law case.
It is, but at the beginning, Hugh
Yeah.
Grant is getting divorced.
No, I don't disagree with you, but here's the thing. In terms of divorce mediations, it's not a divorce movie, but the movie Disclosure with Michael Douglas, if you haven't seen it, they do it. It's a sexual harassment mediation, which is extremely good.
you've been through a few of those. haven't you?
Yeah, thank you very little. That's actually not true.
Yes, just a joke.
That is a joke.
Okay, but
It's a joke.
War of the Roses has sort of an attorney meeting, which is somewhat similar to mediation.
Yeah.
But you're right about Wedding Crashers.
Wedding
Okay.
Crashers is so funny.
But anyway, take it away.
Yeah, so we get a lot of questions about mediation. What is that? What do we have to do? Do we have to do it?
Do we have to be in the same room?
Do we have to be in the same room? So here, Steve, you are a registered mediator. You've done all the qualification stuff for it.
I am the only mediator at Shewmaker Lewis at this time, because you have to dedicate so much time in Georgia to becoming a mediator that I think Molly wasn't even born when I started, and she's 16 now. I'm not kidding. My good buddy Doug Hassinger up in Cumming, actually, I told him how much you have to do to become a registered mediator in Georgia, and I heard his punching of keys, and he's like, Steve, that would be like $43,000 of my billable time to become a mediator, and he's not wrong. It is oppressive how much training you have to go through to become a mediator, but I am one of them, yes. I do mediate somewhat.
Okay, for people who are listening,
Yeah.
what is mediation?
Jimmy.
Mediation is effectively trying to work it out. It is most of the time, and we get this a lot, do we have to do it? Most of the time, courts now, they're going to require it.
Yeah, in Georgia, almost every county requires it. It's a local rule. Now, some of the ones that don't, Gwinnett does not have a blanket rule that requires it, but a lot of the judges will order you.
Judge by
Correct.
judge.
Yeah.
Judge by judge.
Yep.
Yep,
Judge.
and I've even had some cases where the opposing party, kind of what we talked about before, that the opposing party didn't file an answer, refused to participate. We still had an order to mediate from the court, and we'd asked that we be released from that, and they were like, just try, please.
Yeah.
And
Right.
it ended up in that particular case, the opposing party didn't even show up
Right.
to mediation, which then resulted in the Gwinnett ADR basically requesting a show cause against him to pay his half of the mediator.
But sir, before we go to the war stories, let's not put the cart before the horse. Pretend I am one of your clients, and I call you and I say, Jimmy, what is mediation? Explain this to me.
Mediation is alternative dispute resolution.
What's
where
that?
Let's pretend that you two are getting divorced. Steve, you are going to be with whatever low rent attorney you can afford. Patty is going to have a team of super lawyers. And then
All of them. I'm gonna have all of them.
All of them.
Okay.
And they're lining up to represent me. I don't even have
They-
to pay them.
Exactly. They are doing it
a
all
pro bono.
for free.
Okay. I don't understand mediation. What's going to happen on mediation day, Jimmy?
This is what I tell people. If I can interject.
Jimmy.
You can-
What's going to happen, Jimmy?
You're going to try to work it out. There's going to be a mediator, a neutral person trying to go back and forth between the parties to try to resolve it.
Okay, Jimmy, do I have to be in the same room with my wife who I hate?
You do not.
Okay.
Frankly, in my opinion, that is the worst way to ever mediate because of
what
the
I-
emotionally charged level of divorces
Right.
and
What I
family law
tell-
cases in general.
What I tell my clients is this: mediation all in the same room is awesome in the movies because it's dramatic. In real life, it doesn't work.
And if I may, I actually had a mediator, and this is probably 10 years ago. I actually had a mediator who made us do that.
I've done that.
And he's like, well, we're gonna start. And I was like, this is not gonna work. He's like, well, we're gonna start this way. We're gonna try to be in the same room for as long as we can. Well, sure enough, 20 minutes into it, the wife gets mad and she storms out and she's walking down the road and we're done. And I was like, that was a waste of time, and I've never used that mediator again.
Well, and kind of probably about the same time frame, I was very, very, very new into the practice of law, and the mediator said, I just want to do guidelines in the same room. And I said, look, I think this is a horrible idea, horrible, horrible, horrible. And we did that, and my client, who was the wife, literally just sat there like this, staring at husband across the table. And it was kaput from the get-go.
So what I would say is we're all pretty seasoned domestic attorneys now. If I had a mediator do to me what they did to you and Patty, I would say, I'd put my hand up and say, no, that's not happening, and I have the right to tell you that's not happening because, and back to Patty's story, you know, I didn't take Latin in high school because I went to high school in Alabama, but the Latin term for that mediator, loosely translated into English, I won't say it in Latin, but loosely translated in English, is ass clown. Okay,
Yeah.
I would never have that happen.
And literally since that time, probably 10 years ago, anytime a mediator has suggested anything remotely close to that, I'm like, no.
I have
Absolutely
in
not.
the past. I have had attorneys suggest that we should start out together.
Nope.
Because the attorney thought that they were going to use that as an intimidation tactic, and I'm like, no, we're not doing that.
I've absolutely had attorneys suggest that too. I've had mediators suggest it, and I say absolutely not, because I've actually done a full-blown mediation in the same room when I very first started practicing, and we were in Fulton County. And you know, when you used to go to Fulton County for a status, they'd just usher you into another room. We settled it, but it was one of the most awkward experiences.
Yeah.
Can I tell you a funny story real quick? And it is mediation light. May I? Years ago, we were backed up on a trial calendar with a judge in DeKalb County who was very difficult, and I recognized on a Friday we did not want to go to trial on Monday. So I called the other attorney, and I said, let's get our clients in here right now, and let's settle this. And he said, we don't have time to get a mediator. I said, let's just the four of us get together. So we did get together on that Friday afternoon, and I did get everybody in one room, which ordinarily you wouldn't do, but for the limited amount of time we had, I got them in the room, and both of the clients, the husband and the wife, were Russian, and I represented the lady. And while we were in there, we got everything settled because I kind of played mediator. And if you're going to play mediator in the same room, you know, when your client says something outrageous, you call bullshit on your client. You're like, no, that's not productive. So we're in the room, and the husband had this really hard, kind of bitter look, even for a Russian. And as we're talking, you know, it comes out, you know, that he'd been in the Russian army, and my client had been a stripper in America and probably in Russia too. And I looked at this guy, and I was complimenting him because of his age and the year this was. I said, "You were in the Russian army when?" And he told me, and I said, "Did you serve in Afghanistan in the invasion?" He goes, "Yes, I did." And his wife, my client, goes, just dismissively with contempt, he was just truck driver. And I said, no. That was very dangerous. Okay, this was, you know, right before, this was as the war in Afghanistan was kicking off. I said, this is for us, I mean,
Right.
This is a very dangerous job in that environment at that time. And he goes, Mr. Shewmaker, he says, it's okay. It's okay. She doesn't understand. And he goes, and by the way, you were never a very good stripper. So that's why you don't put people in the same room unless you absolutely have to.
Counterproductive.
But let me ask y'all something. Have you ever had a case, because I've had this happen more than once, where the parties ask, can we talk to each other without the attorneys? Like, you're in mediation, separate rooms.
Had it happen last week.
May I?
Yeah.
Yes, because I've had that where, and believe it or not, this happens, where you start to get the impression as you're going through mediation that the parties want to settle, but the roadblock or the stumbling block is the other attorney
who hasn't made his money yet.
Yep.
Right, and I have in 2 cases that I know of, I have finagled and said to the mediator, I think this is what's going on, and my client, agrees and wants to see if maybe the parties can sit down with just the mediator without counsel. Now, both sides have to agree,
Right.
But we did it. And it worked.
I've had it work in 2 cases as well. One in which the parties wanted to talk together with the mediator, and one in which the parties wanted to just talk together without the mediator.
Okay.
So you're absolutely right, though. It can be the other attorney.
But as I tell clients when they ask me what mediation is, these are the words I use almost all the time. I say mediation is a low-stress event. You walk in with no agreement, and if you don't agree that day, you walk out the same as you walked in. No decisions have been made. I say the mediator will go back and forth and attempt to help everybody settle. And it gives you the opportunity to settle your case, because if you don't settle your case, you're putting your case in the hands of a judge. And I think we talked earlier in a previous podcast about the game show of child custody. And we'll talk about jury trials on another date, the whole damn thing is just incredibly dangerous, because if you and your soon-to-be ex don't settle, you're going to let complete strangers settle your case.
Yeah.
That's what I tell people.
What I tell people is, the 2 of you are going to be in separate rooms. My client and me will be in one room. The other side and his attorney will be in the other room. And the mediator, who's a neutral, usually agreed upon by the parties, usually a long practicing family law attorney, but not always.
Not always.
We'll go back and forth between the 2 rooms and try to push the 2 of you to a middle ground that you can live with. Not a middle ground that you're happy with.
Right.
And I tell people all the time, look, if we mediate all day and we come to an agreement and you both walk out if you're unhappy, it's probably a pretty fair agreement.
Yep.
Well, Jimmy, since you're leading this podcast, tell us more about the choice of mediators.
Most of the time, that is coming down to the attorneys, who the attorneys can agree to.
Do you ever ask your client for input on the mediators? People they don't know. What do you ask them about?
No, I really don't.
You don't ask them if they'd be more comfortable with a male or female mediator, or if the opposing side would be more responsive to a male or a female.
No, that's something I don't necessarily. I think I kind of use institutional knowledge of the case and of mediators.
Yeah.
Because of course we know certain mediators who, if it is let's say a business and financial heavy divorce.
Yeah.
Here I have kind of a list of mediators who I may use for that, as opposed to something that may be a more custody heavy case, but a little more limited or light on the property division. Or property division is not complicated at all.
What about the temperament of the mediator, especially if you think your client or the other client is full of bullshit?
Then that is something that, and look, rose-tinted glasses looking at myself. I like to think that I may have enough client control that client who may be full of shit, that I may be able to force them into, here, look at this rationally while we're talking about all of this, and set expectations as to what that may look like.
Right.
But if it is something that I know that the other side is quite volatile and their attorney isn't doing anything to wrangle them in, then I may pull off of this list of mediators who are hard asses who are going to call them on their bullshit.
Well, and I'll just say this about myself. If I had my way, I would just mediate military or retired military cases, because I have some expertise in that area that makes them very easy for me to do, not the least of which is the mentality of service members and how they think and act. But I get mediations beyond that, and I don't turn them down. But I'll tell you something. I get a lot of calls from people that are like, Steve, we think you'd be a good mediator because we know you won't take any shit.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you're right. I'm just going to cut to the chase with people and say, I'm not going to bullshit around. Now, I'll give them an hour or two to get to know them and establish some bona fides and rapport, but or as Jimmy would say, some report. But eventually I'm going to say no.
Buongiorno.
Buongiorno. But that leads me to my next question for you. There are two kinds of mediators out there, in my opinion. The state of Georgia, the GODR that governs mediators, says they basically just want trained monkeys. They want people that go back and forth and pass offers, which you don't need a mediator to do that. Hell, a secretary could do that. AI could do that. What GODR doesn't want, which I think is essential, is I want mediators that go back and forth and say, your position's not reasonable. Your judge is Judge Benton or Judge Glanville, and from experience, that judge is not going to do that. What are your feelings on that?
I think it can be, overall, I think that's helpful. I think that can help to push things to settlement. And I think with certain people, though, that, a lot of times you will know whether a case is actually going to settle or not based upon how motivated the people are to settle. I had one recently that my client remarkably motivated to settle for a number of reasons. The other side, zero desire to settle. And I told him that beforehand. I said, look, she has zero motivation to settle. We've seen that by how she's conducted herself thus far in the case. Like, if we are able to settle anything, I will be utterly and completely shocked.
Yeah.
Did you settle?
A couple minor temporary things.
And then you had a jury trial.
No.
Different case.
Different case.
Alexa, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, I was actually going to add something, but yeah, go ahead.
Here's my question to you. You and Patty are just prolific preparers. You never go anywhere without being prepared. You don't go to the bathroom without a plan. So talk to us about the preparation you do of your client and yourself and your case for any mediation.
Okay, so that's kind of going to segue into what I was going to talk about anyway. So when I talk to a client about mediation, I try to explain to my clients it's a process. Like, we're not going to be here for 5 minutes and know that we're going to settle. It's a process. And I usually tell my client, because we've had these conversations beforehand of what your expectations are, what reasonable expectations are, things like that, that, hey, the mediator is probably going to spend more time in the other room than they will with us. You're still going to pay half, but unless we come to some other arrangement, but they're going to spend more time in the other room because there's probably going to be more work being done in the other room because we've had multiple discussions about what's reasonable, what's realistic, what are things that you can expect. So when I prepare for mediation, really it depends on the case. So if it's finance heavy, I'm going to have a balance sheet, I'm going to have a DERFA, I'm going to have all of my documents at least on the computer that I can easily access so I can reference things. If it's... Go ahead.
What's a DERFA?
Financial affidavit, domestic relations financial affidavit.
And Hannah Apicelli, who used to be with us, nicknamed it a DERF, but same thing, right?
Sure, I guess.
It's 5 pages, right?
Depending on how many assets, debts, and all that other stuff you have, it could go on to 6.
Right. Okay.
Or footnotes.
So you're gonna, yes, as I'm prone to do, but you're gonna have a well prepared one, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'm going to have a financial affidavit that has absolutely everything on there, as updated as possible, and because it's easy to reference, right? If we're talking about this account, that account, whatever, instead of me having to pull the statement for this or that, if I've got it all in one place, a lot easier.
Probably warrants a whole separate conversation one day about a domestic relations financial affidavit, but our associates, if we could ever get them to listen to a podcast, know, because I've beat it into their head, it's not 5 or 6 pages. It's 5 or 6 pages, well written, footnoted, and then we attach documents. My financial affidavits are sometimes an inch thick because, to your point, everything's attached to it. Well, you don't do it, but I do. Everything's attached to it. So when I go to mediation or court and I hand it to a mediator or a judge, and the other side's got a 5-page affidavit and mine's an inch thick with everything attached to it, who do you think the judge has more faith in?
Well, you're definitely going to look much more prepared, and they're going to be able to look back and flip through your documents.
There you go.
So,
all right. Now, you mentioned that the process, and it's a low-stress, low-key environment.
Right.
There are some funny things that happen at mediation.
a lot of funny things can happen at mediation.
Like your client showing up drunk?
That was one.
That was-
I don't think that was-
that was deposition.
No, I thought it was mediation.
It could have been both.
But we won't quibble. No, I'm sorry, I'm wrong. You're right. It was deposition that turned into mediation.
Correct.
That
Yeah,
happens
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah.
But we don't need to get off topic. What's the funniest thing, Jimmy? I'm putting you on the spot. That's ever happened at mediation for you? I told you the Russians that I had. So what do you have?
Funniest thing.
Well, Patty, it was your question, so what do you got?
Well, what about
Jeez, I
what
gotta
about
think
your
about
mediation pop?
Oh God. Well, it didn't actually happen, but
was a
Steve and
joke.
I were mediating a case that was actually an Alabama case. We were
Pike County, Alabama. Opelika.
Russell County, Alabama.
Russell County? Okay.
Russell
Opelika.
County, yeah.
Yeah.
We went out to the opposing counsel's office. We had a couple-hour drive out there.
The Funderburks.
Yes,
Yes,
and
yes.
our client was in the military. The other side was not.
Right.
And we were sitting in mediation, and Steve knows I carry a weapon all the time, and asked that I do a mediation pop, which if you've ever seen the other guys, you know that a desk pop, essentially, everybody's done it, right? Well, what does that mean?
Don't
Well,
think, just go.
Fire your firearm in the office. It's a
Right.
desk pop.
That's right.
So he has a very nice photograph of me with my firearm in hand in our mediation.
That's
So.
right. It's on the wall
on the
outside
wall
our
outside
restroom.
the-
Yeah, and funny things happen at mediation because, again, you're going through the process and the mediator, might start with your side or the other side and goes back and forth. And sometimes there's a lot of downtime. Now sometimes I use that to, prepare for trial. Other
Right.
times it's time to,
Bullshit with your
I-
client.
yeah, and
I
tell
had
jokes,
a
and
mediation.
stories.
I had a mediation not terribly long ago, probably within the last year and a half. Lewis Tesser was the mediator. Great guy, great mediator. I love Lewis. And he came over to me and he said, Steve, here's your client's IRA statements that were given to the other side in discovery. And I said, yeah, that matches what I have. And here's the same statements that they subpoenaed directly from the fund manager, and they were around $50,000 off.
Ooh.
And they were impeccable, but both of them looked perfect.
so that was a high quality forgery.
Yes, except that the court is going to say which one came directly from the fund manager, and then when they say this one, the court would look at the person who provided the other one and go, explain.
Mm-hmm.
And I looked at those, and I went straight to my client in a confidential meeting, and I said, we need to talk about this. And that mediation did not go much further, and neither did our relationship. So you talk about funny things, funny ha-ha and funny odd. Weird stuff can happen at mediations, absolutely.
I had a mediation the other day with Lauren Smith, and I was convinced this case wasn't going to settle.
Lauren's a good lady.
Lauren's a great lady, and I was convinced there was no shot this case was going to settle at the very outset, and we made it through. But man, I heard the other side screaming at her at the top of her lungs during mediation outside of the conference room when I was walking by to go fill up water or something. And all I could think was, man, if I could be a fly on the wall in that room right now.
But you don't get to be, because what
I
a mediator
know.
talks about with one party is confidential, unless the person says you can go over there and tell my husband what I just said.
Right.
What else is on your list of things to talk about for mediations, Jimmy?
Oh, if I could add one more
Yeah.
thing. So, Steve, you were asking before about whether or not you talk to your client about who they'd be more comfortable with.
Yeah.
Usually, I'll have the conversation with the other side of who's your client going to be more receptive to.
Yeah.
Male, female, whatever, because generally I've had the conversation with my client, we've prepared, we've talked about reasonable expectations.
Right.
I don't necessarily give the other side as much credit that they maybe have had those reasonable discussions with their client. So I like to find out who's your client going to be more receptive to, because I've got, hopefully it's that I have pretty good client control of this particular client for mediation.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I will admit that I go into mediation sometimes knowing that my client is the problem. And sometimes I pull the mediator aside before we get started and I say, look, here's the lay of the land. My client, is part of the problem, for these reasons. Like, he or she has, an emotional hang up because of this, and therefore, you're going to have a lot of work in my room.
That's a very sophisticated approach to pick a mediator, first of all, because you recognize that your client might be the difficult one. And then when you get that mediator there, or a day or two in advance, and you say, I chose you specifically for this reason.
Yeah.
It could be because I have military expertise, or it could be because a particular mediator is known for being, maybe an older female who could talk to a younger female party and say, you need to listen to me.
Right.
But generally what I say to parties or my clients is, we're going to go to mediation. If we don't settle, then nothing's lost, but we are a step closer to trial. Why mediate? Because the judges in many counties will order mediation because it settles 3 out of 4 cases. So if you have 1,000 cases as a Superior Court judge in Georgia, why not send them all to mediation and clear them out? So, and this is something we haven't talked about. DeKalb County, Georgia, you can't get into the courtroom until you mediate.
Yep.
Fulton
Meaning-
County requires it.
Meaning, DeKalb County, Forsyth County is this way too.
Henry
you
County.
can't, Henry County,
Muskogee.
you can't even have a temporary hearing until you mediate. Muskogee County, you can have a temporary hearing
Right,
before you
but they
mediate.
won't do a final.
Which I disagree with in
Right.
so many circumstances that you may have a very volatile situation in a home where both parties are still in the home and nobody's going to come to an agreement.
Right.
You need the court to make a decision as to how things should be on a
Right.
temporary basis.
We need some temporary rules before we can. This
And
case
the
can
and the other
proceed.
problem with that is if you have, say, one party that makes $1 million a year and the other party makes nothing and has no access to it, if you try to ask for a temporary hearing in Forsyth County because you're representing the party that makes no money and you can't get any money because the other side thumbs their nose at you, that is a distinct disadvantage because a lot of attorneys will say, I'm not going to take your case unless you can get a credit card or your
Right.
mama can give me some money. I'm just not going to take your case. And that is harmful. And I criticize those counties that do that. You know, if Forsyth County wanted to say, we won't entertain a temporary hearing unless it's about temporary attorney's fees because we understand the financial issues can oftentimes be a problem, I'd be okay with that. But they won't even do that.
Right.
Now, I do have a case that's assigned to Smith right now in Forsyth that we got a temporary without having to mediate
How?
because wife is incarcerated.
Oh, well, that helps.
Yeah, but you know what? You can file a motion. So,
Yeah.
and I've done that.
Yeah.
I filed a motion to waive the mediation requirement before a temporary in Forsyth County
And
before.
it's
sometimes
worked?
sometimes they'll do it.
Yeah, sometimes they'll do it. It just
Okay.
depends.
I haven't
Yeah.
had that success, unfortunately.
And incarcerated and also had a pretty significant mental health history of schizophrenia,
Oh,
Solid.
diagnosed.
Solid.
Worse than yours?
Yes, I take my medication.
might make mediation hard.
Joking.
Depending on who shows up.
Could
Not
be a little
joking.
difficult, yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Here, I thought of a funny story, which this goes into.
Wait, is this about mediation or about your mom?
We'll discuss that one offline.
Okay.
Oh boy.
Hey, I am going to take him out back and shoot him.
Okay.
Anyway, so
Just
had
in the
a
foot,
had a it was a mediation pop. It was by accident.
Not now.
Had a mediation a few years ago. That this kind of gets into the cost benefit analysis at the end of a divorce. When how much money do you want to spend arguing about this stuff? So these particular parties, the husband was actually a retired Marine. They had two houses that were very close to equal in value. They had a handful of retirement accounts. We got through the big stuff very quickly, at like a couple hours in. And it was almost like the parties in both of their heads, it went off. This was too easy. Like, we need to fight about something. And so my client says, okay, well, in the house that he's getting, I want all of these figurines that are in this cabinet in this
boy.
room. And I was like, all right, well, that sounds kind of girly, so whatever. Like, it's this big bad Marine dude. Like, he ain't gonna care.
Whoa.
They-
Were they figurines or were they action figures?
No, they
Figurines.
no, they were
Different.
porcelain figurines.
Were those the Yadros?
No,
What's a Yadro?
I don't.
That's like a brand or a line, and they're like, I don't know, collector's items.
They're
They're
little
they're
angel looking
Spanish.
things
They're
or something.
Spanish?
Yes,
Okay.
they are.
Anyway, no, that's not what they were. Anyway, so this goes on for like the mediator, then goes to the other side, and then comes back 20 minutes later and was like, no, he wants them. And I was like,
You're kidding,
he
right?
wants them? Okay, whatever. And so I look at my client and I go, okay, how many of these things are there? She goes, I don't know, like 30, 35. I said, can you identify half of them that you want? She goes, yeah. So she writes out a list of the ones that she wants. This goes back and forth for another 30, 40 minutes.
Oh my goodness.
And I finally, like, why I didn't do this from the outset, I don't know. But I look at my client and I go, what are these things called? And I just look at her and I go, you could buy the whole set for $400.
Oh my gosh.
and I go, between my fee, between the mediator's fee, between opposing counsel's fee, you and your husband could have bought 3 sets of these already. And the mediator's sitting there and he's just shaking his head. This poor guy is just shaking his head.
He's shaking his head about it. He's making money.
Well, that's fair.
And I'm pretty good friends with opposing counsel. And I said, tell her I will be in her office. And so he's like, all right. And so she walks in, and I'm like, what the hell are we doing? And she goes, she can have them. Like, I got him off of it. She can have them. And it was just one of those where I thought, oh my God, like, that's what we just spent. But then, fast forward a month, when my client had to have all of her property out of that house.
She didn't get them.
I said, you get your figurines? And she goes, I left those stupid things. I didn't want them.
Oh my God.
And then at that point, I was just like,
Okay.
That's like people who go all the way through divorce and have jury trials and then they get married again.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Oh,
we'll talk
geez.
about those things and other topics. This is anything else on mediation? All right, y'all. This
You
is
should do it.
This is yes, you should absolutely do it, and you may have no choice about it.
There you go.
If you have any questions about it, let us know. But this is Jimmy Alexa Lewis, Patty and Steve Shewmaker, Lawyers Without Billboards. Peace out, y'all.
That's it for this episode of Lawyers Without Billboards. If you found this episode helpful, make sure to follow and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. For more resources or to get in touch with us, visit shewmakerandlewis.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.